Hi everybody, Nate here from WASD20. Today I'm going to be drawing a dungeon map and sharing with you the encounters that I used when I ran this dungeon. The goal is for you in about 20 minutes or so to be able to walk away with a dungeon that you could use in a game tonight. Let's do this. So as I start the drawing here, I just want to note that this is a Dwarven mine that I used in a home game about a month ago now for my party of 4 level 2 characters for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. So it's not maybe perfectly balanced for that, but I tend to wing it a bit. And anyway, I'm going to shut up and let you watch the drawing here. If you do want to skip the drawing portion, I start talking about the encounters in the dungeon and how you might run this at about the 4-minute mark. Until then, I'll shut up and let you watch the drawing and listen to the music. Talk to you in a few. All right, everybody, the drawing is finished, and now if you're still here, you're probably wanting the encounters. Let's talk about how you could actually use this dungeon in a game now, and I did use it in a game. Now, I will say this. First off, I don't think that this dungeon would make for a full session of D&D if you're thinking about 3 or 4 hours of gameplay. It probably took my players 2 hours or a little less, I would say. Yeah, probably a little more than 2 hours, because they had just a little bit of maybe 15-20 minutes of interactions in town, and then they had a little bit of time on the road, just very briefly, and pretty quickly found this mine. They were tasked by a group of dwarves who was new to the area. They were all miners who had come to this area to discover some of their old lost mines that some of their clansmen had made probably centuries ago. The dwarves kind of said, you go check this direction, we'll go check this direction. There are a lot of these sorts of mines in the area. Prospectors from dwarves a long time ago had come this way and had since abandoned the mines, and maybe we don't know why. Ooh, we always love that mystery. So that's just a little warning. I don't know if this makes for a completely full session of gameplay, but if you get a little interaction in town, maybe they meet in a tavern and get this quest or something like that, then it would probably be pretty good. All right, let's dig in here. So first thing you notice, there's this entrance. That's where we're gonna start. Kind of makes sense. All right, so the entrance here, there are some trees, there are some bushes, there could be some rocks. You could make it very hidden, or you could make it just slightly hidden. I didn't make it very hidden. The players saw the opening of a cave on this kind of, cluster of rocks in the area. If your players are like mine, they're pretty cautious in general, so they don't just go barging in. They kind of tiptoe in. They see if they can hear anything and all that stuff. They eventually do decide they want to light a torch because not everyone in the party has dark vision. And there's pretty much nothing that I had in this area, though you absolutely could. One of the themes of my campaign is undead, so we will get to some of that later in this dungeon. There are some skeletons, and you could absolutely make some dwarven skeletons, or perhaps it's more recently abandoned and they're dwarven zombies, who knows. But one thing you're going to notice is I just add lots of dungeon dressing. I add stuff that I don't necessarily know how the players will use, but I often have a feeling they're going to use some of this stuff. So I put rocks around, scattering rocks around. Here's some old rotten wood. Here's a little ledge that, just an elevation change that if they do get into combat in this area can make a strategic difference. Here's just a big old boulder. So adding things like that in your dungeons can be really, really helpful. Just add things that you think would make sense in these spaces. My players were trying to be very, very quiet as they were walking through this area. They found this wood right here and they thought, so maybe this is not a completely natural cave. This could be one of the mines that we're looking for. They also found this weapon rack. Actually, I'm not sure if I had a weapon rack there or just some more rotten wood. Anyway, I would say probably these weapons might not be usable depending on how long the dungeon has been abandoned, but you could absolutely, throw a club, throw an axe in there, whatever you want to do. For my players, this was long, long ago abandoned, and they're not finding very much of use here. They do eventually kind of creep around this corner. I think they send the halfling rogue up ahead to kind of scout this area because they heard something. Now, a couple ways you can do this. The giant spider, you can absolutely use the giant spider's perception against the player's stealth to see if it hears. And then you decide, is it going to pursue or is it going to hide? If the spider hears the players or can sense them, sometimes I'll just roll a d20. And if it gets above a 10, then I say it's going to come out and check. If it gets under a 10, then I say, no, it's actually kind of wary and it's going to climb up higher in its web and try to scope things out. But I did have my spider being very wary and trying to basically climb up higher in the web and maintain and try to stay hidden, perhaps. So my players eventually kind of peeked around the corner. The halfling was seen, but the spider actually did stay there. The players had some debate about what to do, and they eventually decide, I think we have to kill this spider because we don't want to be afraid to turn our backs throughout this whole mine here and think maybe the spider could sneak up on us. So they eventually do engage the spider in combat. I think they tried to talk to the spider, which was really interesting. Sometimes if players try to do something like that, I might actually let them try, and sometimes I'm just like, no, this is an animal here. But anyway, I thought that was funny. Look at the monster manual or whatever book you're using for your game and try to use all the abilities of the spider and think like a spider. My players did burn some of the web, eventually destroying some of the web. Eventually they killed the spider, and some things fell out of the web, including an old dwarven sword that was probably pretty rusty and not in good shape, but the blade can absolutely be useful, and it looks like it was once a very fine weapon, and that will show up later in the dungeon. So, having killed the spider, they move on in the dungeon, and I think they went to explore this room next. They went and they checked out this room. This room is essentially a place where the ogre eats. Here's the ogre. So yes, there is a two-headed ogre. Why a two-headed ogre? Well, because that's the miniature that I had, and I thought it was a cool miniature, so we went with that. The ogre eats here, and there's some like rotten food, probably some rancid meat and things like that. I made like this big old bed of straw. I think it was a lot bigger in my actual encounter, and that's probably where the ogre slept. It did not smell very good, things like that. And then when I actually went to draw the dungeon, I kind of forgot about that, and I made a bed for the ogre over here. Some kind of blanket or bedroll or I don't know what. So do what you want with that. But mining tools, I don't think I had that in my encounter, but that's just, again, adding things can be fun. Little lamps right here that could be lit, or some kind of braziers perhaps, and a rock. And we're moving on in the dungeon. So not much there, but some things that could give them hints about what might be living here. All right, so they head down. In my case, this was probably a little bit more angular than I would have preferred, but that's the dungeon tiles I was working with. I was using Fantasy World Creator tiles, which are really nice. So I did have a pretty sharp angle there. But this is where they're starting to notice that, okay, dwarves have dug this. And there is a dwarf in my party, and there's also another human who is very knowledgeable about dwarves. So they would notice this. They did try to search for, okay, what kind of mine would this be? And they discovered that it was a gold mine. And I don't know how gold mining works, but I made it that there's clearly some veins of what looks like were gold in the walls here and has since been mined. And so anyway, I don't know how that works in reality, and you don't have to either, but if you do, that's great. It can add more flavor to your game for sure. They're going down this passage. There is actually a secret chamber right here. And I wanted my players to make a pretty easy perception roll to notice that. And they did. They sent the halfling in, and the halfling discovers that there are some dwarven brew bombs. I think he takes them out, and the dwarf identifies and goes, oh yeah, I know what those are. So if you don't have a dwarf in the party, maybe you make it a little bit harder for them to know what these are. Maybe they try to drink it, and it's just the strongest liquor in the world, and it tastes terrible. I don't know. But I basically made like, these are kind of like Molotov cocktails, but they're really more like grenades, and that's just fun. So that's what I did. The players kind of debated, should we take these with us? This seems dangerous. When they got to the pit trap, they realized, oh boy, if we don't make this jump and whoever is holding these dwarven brew bombs falls in, that could be very bad. So I think they initially left them there, but they do end up coming back for them. We'll get to that in a sec. So for discovering this chamber, I think I made it pretty easy, maybe like a DC 10 or a DC 12, or you can make it pretty hard, a DC 15, but if you have 4 players rolling and, searching something, you can make them feel a little, maybe draft of air through here that's unnatural, or perhaps the light of a torch catches an unnatural looking little inlet in the wall. So they broke away some stone and they ended up getting in there. Pit trap. I made this covered in some very thin boards with some rubble on top of it. Not very well disguised so that the players could notice it pretty easily. Maybe you make it a, DC 12 to notice the trap, DC 12 investigation or perception, whatever you want to do there. And then if they fall in the pit, I think it was like 1d6 damage or 1d6 plus 2. I don't remember exactly what I did. But not a ton of damage. There were no spikes at the bottom of pit. It was just, 10, 15 feet of fall damage, essentially. I don't think I had any players fall the first time the way over. They all made the jump. Something like a DC 10 athletics, I believe. So not a super meaningful trap there, but just a little obstacle, something that will slow things down and get in their way and cause them to think creatively. So they can jump over, but they could actually also use some other stuff. Maybe your players have a ladder. That's kind of a weird thing, but sometimes parties actually carry ladders around. That can come in handy in a situation like this. Maybe they can use some of this rotten wood here. I don't know. Maybe there's a couple pieces of that are good enough. Maybe they could take this table and actually just drag the table over. Lots of options for what they could do there to overcome that obstacle. A wooden cart. I had no idea what they would do with this, but I just put things in my dungeons again, and, players end up using them. So here's a wooden cart. The first way they used it was they tied their mastiff to it, and then the halfling rode being pulled by the mastiff. It was hilarious. It was awesome. And so then my players got a more creative idea. When they got to right about here, they made a perception check, and they did see this door, and they heard something behind the door. I think the door was locked, or at least closed. And what they decided to do was go back for the dwarven bombs, put them in the cart, and ram the cart into the door. At least I think that's what they did. But anyway, super creative. I didn't have that in mind, but again, you just give your players tools and they'll use them. So the ogre runs out. It briefly converses with them. It asks, did Vatic send you? And Vatic, they don't know, is the main villain of the campaign, but they're starting to learn things about this now. It talks in broken common, and eventually a fight breaks out. They throw some more of these dwarven brew bombs at it, and eventually, after I think knocking one of my players unconscious, eventually they do defeat it. However, the two-headed ogre had thrown some kind of device. I can't remember what it was exactly, but I think they heard a bang of some kind behind them. Maybe he threw a wand or some kind of raise the dead stick. That's a thing, right? The raise the dead stick. The +1 raise the dead stick. Yeah. Anyway, I mentioned that a major theme of my campaign is that Vatic, this major NPC, is trying to raise an army of the dead. And this two-headed ogre is one of his many minions, one of his servants, and he has equipped his servants with the ability to raise the dead in certain ways too. So this ogre had some kind of magical device that would raise the dead, and there happen to be 2 dwarven skeletons here. He used it, and there are now some dwarven skeletons that the players are facing off against. So they defeat the ogre, but there are 2 dwarven skeletons. And when the players did enter this chamber here and kill the final skeleton, they heard a roaring laughter throughout the chamber. They turn, and what do they see? A spectral figure. The ghost of Barduk Frostfury. And he's just laughing. Just found this smashing of the dwarf skeleton absolutely hilarious, and he says something like, "Oh, a nice shot! Ha ha ha!" And he's holding a big mug of ale, and he swigs from the ale, and he's leaning on a big keg of ale, and he basically is laughing at the fact that they just smashed his own skeleton, and he finds it pretty funny. So he's got a good sense of humor, a jovial fellow, but they also notice, oh, Frostfury, that is the family name of the dwarf minor leader who is kind of sending them on this quest and asking for their help. He's a little more crabby and not as good-natured as this ghost, however. So he ends up being the grandfather, I believe it was, of Skalal Frostfury, and they can't wait to tell Skalal all about it. The sword that they found, the dwarven sword of the spiderweb, was Barnook's old blade, and the players say, oh yes, we will return this to your grandson. He doesn't really know much about his grandson, died before he could know him. But the Dwarven Ghost idea, I have to confess, is a complete ripoff from my DM, Matt Click, in Provokers Season 1, Episode 2, I believe it was. He used a very similar thing. A Dwarven Ghost who told the players a riddle. And that's what my Dwarven Ghost does as well. Light and darkness are a huge theme of my campaign. So when they come in, the dwarf tells them a riddle based on light and darkness, and the players, I'm not using it so often that the players know the answer will always be light or darkness or anything like that. One of the answers to a riddle was one of the riddles they found was involving lighting a lantern, things like that. So this one was, the more there is of me, the less you see. What am I? So I just, Google like riddles involving light or riddles involving darkness. And this one, of course, is darkness. So they get the riddle right, and then he tells them, there is something I have for you here. He kind of gives them some information about the campaign. He sees that they are fighting Vatic's minions, and that immediately makes him trust them, and he wants to give them an artifact that is hidden. Now, for my players, I think they had to light a lamp, like he disappeared, and then they had to light a brazier or something like that in order to do this. But I actually thought it would be kind of cool if the answer to the riddle is darkness, and then he just disappears or something like that. And then maybe the players realize we need to put out our torches or put out any lights that are in here. And then maybe this family symbol of the Frost Furies starts glowing the blue flame, and they go over and depress the stone or something like that, and it opens up, right? Something like that I think could be cool. So in there, you can have them find whatever. It could just be a lot of dwarven gold. It could be some other magic item. For me, it was an ancient tome that has some knowledge that will help them in the rest of the campaign. They can't translate it now, but they are going to take it to others who can. That's how I did it, but you can do whatever you want in here. There's some pillars in here. I know my ghost symbol is doesn't look like a dwarf. I just drew a little ghost. But you've also got this hidden mine shaft in here, which I didn't use at all, but that is totally an option because the mine must go deeper. This is a very small mine, right? This right here is actually an altar with a table on it. You could make some kind of instruments up there or some ceremonial devices. I don't know, do what you want with it. Have fun. If you end up using this dungeon map, I would love to hear how it goes for you. Tweak it, make changes. I would also love to hear from you in the comments below. What sorts of things do you think this dungeon is missing? Those of you who are very experienced dungeon masters, you might have some great advice. I've only been doing this a few years, and I know I have a lot to learn yet about dungeon mastery. What sorts of things would you add in a dungeon encounter of this nature? What is it missing in your mind? Just curious what you guys would think, and I would love to hear from you in the comments, get some great discussion going, get some great idea sharing going. This has been Frost Fury Mine North, and I want to thank you guys for joining me. Lastly, I want to thank my patrons so much for their support. Patrons are people who donate to this channel on a monthly basis. You can check out my Patreon page, patreon.com/WASD20. Thank you so much, patrons, for all that you do. Your generosity is what fuels this channel and keeps me going. I have a lot of cool patron rewards you can check out on the page, but as a thank you to patrons this time, I'm actually going to be giving you guys a version of this map without any of the labels in case you want to actually directly use this map with your players, rather than just what I have here as a Dungeon Master reference. So I will put a Dungeon Master reference, this version of the map, in the video description as well, so go check that out. And if you're not subscribed, I would love to have you subscribe. Just hit that button down below. Give me a like if you enjoyed the video, and everybody take care. You'll see me again very soon.